Good morning. I'd like to call this informational meeting of the House Aging and Older Adult Services Committee to order. Everyone should know that this meeting is being recorded and members and guests should silence all cell phones and electronic devices. For attendance today, let's ask each committee member to introduce themselves by stating their name and the district they represent. We'll start down at this end.
Good morning, everyone. Representative Jessica Benham from the 36th District in Allegheny County.
Good morning, Jim Prokopiak, 140th, Bucks County.
Representative Melissa Serrato, 151st District, Montgomery County.
I'm Representative Leanne Kruger, 161st District in Delaware County.
Steve Menser, 97th District, Lancaster County.
Maureen Madden, 115th Legislative District, Monroe County.
Representative Eric Nelson, Westmoreland County.
Brian Rosal, 56th District, Westmoreland County.
Representative Joanne Stair, 107th District, Northumberland and Schuylkill County.
Good morning. I'm John Schlegel, representing the 101st Legislative District in the heart of Lebanon County.
And on remote, we have Representative Tariq Khan as of the moment. Because there are many committee meetings throughout the morning, people will come and will go because they have to go to other meetings. Just want you to be aware of that. Today, I would like to welcome Department of Aging Secretary Jason Kovulich and Acting Deputy Secretary Jonathan Bowman. Thank you both for joining us today to share information on your department's new comprehensive aging performance evaluation, commonly referred to as CAPE. Secretary Kovulich, over the years, you've been a leader and an advocate for our seniors and our adult population. And I just want to start by saying thank you for all that you do. I was in a room of folks from Scranton last night, and whenever I mentioned your name, it was always responded to with such care and such appreciation for the dedication that you have shown serving our aging population, and we appreciate that. And we appreciate the refreshing implementations like the Aging Our Way plan, the Caregiver Toolkit, and this new CAPE monitoring system. Before we get, and that's all I have, before we get started, Chair Menser, do you have any remarks?
Thank you, Chair Madden, and good morning, everyone. And I'd like to thank you, Chair, for scheduling this very important meeting concerning the monitoring of the AAAs through the CAPE system. We're all anxious about this because of what's been talked about recently, and there's been a lot of discussion about elder abuse and the need to improve prevention and response. So we appreciate the Secretary and Jonathan, you, for coming over here and giving us an update on the CAPE monitoring system. So, thank you.
Good morning, chairs. Good morning, members. Today we're here to talk about our comprehensive monitoring system and a shift from what we traditionally had done at the Department of Aging for a period of time that was subjective, that was not consistent, that really did not produce the results that we wanted. The results are that we want to see older adult services thrive. We want to see if older adults get better service. We want to see the improvement of the work of the area agencies on aging. In November of 2020, the previous Bureau Director, Denise Getchen, sent an email to one of our counties asking for some assistance. The subject of the email was an entire review and revamp of their monitoring program, 2020. It highlighted areas that needed to be improved, free up time for the department to work with technical assistance with the area agencies on aging, eliminate the color system, red, yellow, green, that once existed at the Department of Aging, ensure that sample sizes were consistent and were able to be pulled uniformly across the Commonwealth as we monitored, and to make sure that there's a way to really highlight and hold accountable counties that were deficient and that were not making the changes that they needed, and also be more transparent. So make sure that the public knows what was going on. This was 2020. This was at least almost actually 4 years before I became secretary, that this was highlighted at the department as a need. There was also the discussion about area agencies on aging that were performing well, not monitoring them, but once every 2 years as an incentive for area agencies on aging to do well. Fast forward, I become secretary. None of those things were done. In fact, the first aging program directive I signed was to eliminate the red, yellow, green system. All of the areas of concern highlighted in 2020 were not moved on. When we sit here at the end of today's presentation, you will notice that every single one of those areas has been addressed. Every one of those areas has been taken care of in this administration. And we've brought change to a system that needed change, and we've improved the work throughout the Commonwealth, which is really the goal, to improve the work. So if we can go to the first slide, please. We want to talk about, second slide, I'm sorry. We want to talk about where we get our authority to monitor. And we get our authority to monitor from both the state and the federal government. We are required to do consistent monitoring, to do monitoring not just once a year. We're not a licensing agency. We do not license area agencies on aging. We continuously monitor them. We continuously monitor their performance, which means at all times we are looking at what they're doing. We're looking at how they're performing, and we get the authority to do that through the federal government, through our state government, and through our aging program directives, as well as our cooperative block grant agreements. Next slide, please. To really set the stage, we have to talk about the difference between the old system and the new system. Okay, so at one time, the Department of Aging did have comprehensive monitoring, and we moved away from that system to a fragmented system where protective services became siloed. Protective services took all of its functionality, the technical assistance, the monitoring, even the data and policy and legislation into one house, unlike any other part of the Department of Aging. The other parts of the Department of Aging continue to work with all branches throughout the entire department, work collectively to move the mission of the agency forward. We moved away from a fragmented monitoring system back to the original monitoring system, which was comprehensive, which means, like other systems, we look at all of the work that the department is doing or that the area agencies on aging are doing, both in options programs, caregiver programs, financial programs, and protective services. We look at it all at the same time. We wanted to make sure that we restructured and made sure that we had real technical assistance. As you saw in the 2020 email, it was a concern that we were not able to provide technical assistance to the area agencies on aging. By making a clear separation of duties and moving technical assistance to one side and moving monitoring to the other side, where all other monitoring in the department had been taking place, by separating that work out, we created those clear separations of duty and were able to provide better technical assistance than we had been to the area agencies on aging, thus eliminating one concern that I highlighted. The schedule. There was no set schedule. There was no set time when we went out to monitor area agencies on aging. Since 2017, only twice have all 52 area agencies on aging been monitored. Twice since 2017. Once, or when I came in as secretary the year before, they only did 29 monitorings. So we immediately moved on that, and in my first year we did 48, and in my second year you have a new system that was piloted and tested to make sure that what we're doing is actually having an impact and changing the work like all of you have wanted us to do, making the work better for older adults. We now have a set schedule that maximizes our resources, that is transparent, that is posted online. You will know when we're coming to see an area agency on aging to do a CAPE monitoring. There was inconsistent and unrealistic performance expectations, meaning that the weights and the categories were subject to the person sitting there doing them. So they changed regardless of county, they changed regardless of service area. So if you were rating in Bucks County and you went to Westmoreland County, there was no guarantee the weights of the same category were going to be the same because they changed based on the person that was sitting there doing them. There was no consistency. There was no scientific way to prove that what you were saying was more right than what was being said over here. We fixed that. We made sure that they're objective. We made sure that the measures are consistent in all 52 area agencies on aging, and we removed the subjectivity. We removed the opinions. It is not good enough to say, in my opinion, it is based on law and regulation that this finding has been found. So that is one of the changes that we have made. There was a complex algorithm that no one to date could break down and tell you how it worked. No one knew how the algorithm worked. No one could tell you how to take it apart. It was subjective. People changed it based on what they saw and what they felt. We eliminated that. We created a simple key performance area measures that can be used everywhere in the state, that we know if we're here and we're looking at this, it will look the same when we're over here reviewing, so that we can guarantee what we're looking at is consistent, and we can guarantee that the product we produce at the end of the day is focused on improving the work. The focus on the overall score, we've changed that. Compliance versus non-compliance. Compliance is a minimal standard. It's a pass-fail. So if you just get to compliance, that means you're just good enough. It doesn't mean you're doing good work. It means you're just doing good enough. We have moved away from that. We are focused on individual measures and categories so that we can say, in this area you're excelling, in this area you need to improve, in this area you're doing fine, but could do better. This helps us provide a roadmap to area agencies on aging to show them what they need to do better, to provide better technical assistance and training to them so that they can perform better. And when you look at the outcomes, when you look at the data that will be available online, that has been available online, you will see a change in the metrics. You will see counties improve. We have counties that were reporting in the 30s and percentiles that are in the 96th percentile now. We didn't change the measures. We changed how we helped them do the work. We changed how we educated them. We changed how we trained them. Generalized technical assistance is now specialized. We go into the area that area agency on aging needs help, and we help them in that specific spot. Next slide, please. Specific schedule and review periods, and for when we're going to be able to, sorry, I just lost my place. For correcting performance. So corrective action plans in the old system went for a year. And then when we came back, supposedly, when we were supposed to come back, we would talk about your corrective action plan. That's not the practice anymore. Practice improvement plans are developed with the area agencies on aging, and every month, every interaction we have with them is talking about, are you making progress on your practice improvement plan? Because we're not out there once a year looking at them. We're talking to them every month about their work. We're pulling reports every month to see how their work is doing, and we're seeing if their practice improvement plan is making a difference. We're out there continuously working with them, which is what we are required to do. We're also identifying trends. We're identifying that this is just not happening in this county. It's happening all across the state, so we need to do better and train better in these areas. So we have now a system to pull that data, to look at that data, to know this is what we need to do differently to get the work better. Because that's what, again, at the end of the day, is serving older adults better, serving the communities all across Pennsylvania better. Systematic issues were not captured in the old systems. We also have a system where we now peer review internally. So that means technical assistance and monitoring have discussions before the findings are sent out to the area agencies on aging. People come to consensus. There's not just one or two people making a determination that someone's not compliant. The department as a whole comes together, looks at the information, and a consensus is found. So then we send out our findings to the area agencies on aging. So it is not just based on the mood or the individual person that's out there. It's based on what the findings are and what we have found in law and regulation needs to be addressed. Again, cases were processed with interpretation. That's no longer the case. We have made this as objective as possible. Sample sizes. There was no consistent sample sizes anywhere in the 52 area agencies on aging. You could have 100 cases pulled over here and 25 cases pulled over there. It didn't matter how big the county was. There was no set sample size. Now you have a set sample size. You have a formula for how we go out so that we can consistently say this is how we're doing this monitoring all across the state. There was tragic flaws in our old system. And one of the biggest tragic flaws was the focus on risk. The risk is not what the law requires us to focus on. Imminent risk is what the law requires us to focus on. The immediate risk, the safety concern. So this goes back to the law, to the intent, the immediate risk. And when you think about this, it's a very complex situation. But in our old system, if an older adult was living with their son or daughter, and that son or daughter either exploited them or abused them in some way, and we removed that situation, we corrected that situation, that the son or daughter moved out of the house, we took care of the immediate risk. We took care of the imminent risk of harm. In our old system, they would not think that was sufficient enough. They would say that older adult is still at risk because there was no guardianship. There was nothing in place to prevent that son or daughter from coming into the house. So we're going away from the what ifs. Well, what if this happens? Everybody in this room is at risk today. We're all at risk for something. This is about imminent risk. This is about imminent risk of harm to an older adult and making sure that we are doing our best to mitigate that risk at all times and provide services to the older adult. We have moved tremendously away from an old system that was flawed in all the ways that I've highlighted to a system that provides consistency throughout the Commonwealth, that provides a consistent schedule when we're going to get out there and see the area agencies on aging, that gives you a transparent performance report that will be on our website as of April, that gives you other reports that are on our website. So we have handled everything of concern in that first email that I highlighted in 2020. We've addressed. We've taken care of all of those things. In 25 months, my team built a new tool, piloted it in 5 counties all across the state, and made sure that it worked before we rolled it out this January. We did that in 18 months. We built a new system in 25 months. So work that was highlighted to be done in 2020 that didn't get moved on has been taken care of since I became secretary in 2023. Now, Jonathan is one of the key developers in CAPE, and he's going to get into more details about how the system works. But I really felt it was important for us to get that background out there to say, this was just not something that we decided that we had to do or we were going to do. This was something that had been needed for the Department of Aging for decades. This is a review and a change in process and a change in practice that we needed to do so we can see the work in our communities get better. And as you see the data come out and the new technical assistance that we're providing to the counties come out every month, you will see the work is getting better and older adults are being served better. We will never be perfect, but we will continuously work to make sure our system gets better every day for those we serve. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan now for his portion.
Thank you, Secretary. Appreciate the background. It's very important to understand where the department was at in the past to help inform the decision and direction of why we are heading in the direction we are and how we came about the development of CAPE. So I'm very happy to be here today to talk about CAPE, which is the Comprehensive Aging Performance Evaluation. I'm going to take a kind of deep dive into the CAPE, what it is, how it works, and then go through how it's going to be presented to the general public. So before I get started on this slide, I just want to draw your attention to a few things. One, that all of the performance measures that we're talking about within the CAPE are tied to verification sources. And what I mean by that is that these performance measures are tied to either state or federal requirements. So they are objective measures. They are not subjective. We can literally tie them back to specific language and requirements on area agencies on aging. The second thing I'd like to call your attention to is on the protective services side, that the compliance threshold was actually increased from an 80% overall score, which was used historically. We've now raised that bar to 85% in the CAPE. So each of the performance measures that we're going to talk about are now held at an 85% threshold for the area agencies on aging. Some of the components within the CAPE are designed to assess performance in protective services, the options program, caregiver support program, as well as fiscal components. So this is really a comprehensive approach to overseeing programs within the Department of Aging and the administration at the AAA level. So on the slide presented here before you, there are 2 components, and essentially there are 2 tools within the CAPE. First, we'll talk about the left-hand side, which is the Older Adult Protective Services tool. This tool is now comprised of 25 overall performance measures, and as I already stated, all of these measures are tied back to verification sources, meaning either federal or state requirements. And again, as I already mentioned, the performance measures are compliant at 85% or higher. So these 25 performance measures are going to feed into 5 overarching categories, which is very important. And I'm going to ask that you pay attention to these 5 categories because we're going to be talking about them later. And the 5 overarching categories are documentation requirements, data management, administrative oversight, risk mitigation and safety, and investigative activities. So now we'll focus on the options and caregiver support program, which is another component of the CAPE. So the Options and Caregiver Support Program focuses on 36 overall performance measures. And again, the compliance is at 85%. So you'll see consistencies between the two tools. We're using a consistent 85% as a compliance threshold. And we are also tying all of these measures back to federal and state requirements. The Options and Caregiver Support Program feeds into 6 overarching categories, which again, if we'll pay attention to those because we'll be discussing those again later. And these categories are documentation requirements, data management, administrative oversight, care management, program eligibility, and policy and fiscal operations. Now, you will see some parallel between the two tools, specifically within the first 3 categories, and that's because there is overlap between some of the way the programs are handled and administered. Documentation requirements, data management, administrative oversight, both occur within the Options Caregiver Support Program and the Protective Services Program. So in looking at these broad categories and having some overlap, we are able to identify trends between the two programs and look into any potential systemic issues that are occurring within the Area Agency on Aging. So if we can go to the next slide. So now I'm going to talk about the CAPE performance evaluation findings. So I already mentioned that 85% is the threshold that we're using for each of the performance measures. Again, there's 25 performance measures for protective services. There's 36 performance measures for the Options and Caregiver Support Programs. So any individual performance measure receiving a score of 85% or less is considered non-compliant. So historically, there was an overall score that was used. Now we're looking at individual performance measures and considering them non-compliant if they do not meet that threshold of 85%. Area Agencies on Aging will receive a statement of findings from the department with non-compliant measures and a unique identifier that will allow them to view their non-compliant records and to understand where they may have needed a correction. AAAs will be required to complete and submit a performance improvement plan to the department for every single non-compliant measure. So this is potentially 25 measures for protective services and 36 for the Options Caregiver Support Program. Now, I want to draw your attention to the performance improvement plan, or I may refer to it as a PIP. The PIP is something new. Previously, this was called a corrective action plan, but the department changed this term to a performance improvement plan because we really want to dive deeper into the root cause of what caused any failure or systemic non-compliance within the agency. So we're not going back and correcting a case necessarily. We're looking to make an improvement to performance as we move forward. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about the CAPE review timelines. And this is kind of detailed, but I think it's really important because not only are we holding the AAAs to a standard, but we're also holding the department ourselves to a standard as far as monitoring and timelines. So the Department of Aging will engage with a AAA to do a CAPE monitoring. The department will then review selected cases and conduct a results call within 30 business days to discuss findings and identify any performance measures that were non-compliant. A statement of findings will then be issued within 2 days of the results call, and a performance improvement plan, or a PIP, will be returned by the Area Agency on Aging to the department for approval. Then within 15 business days of issuance of the statement of findings, that PIP will be submitted for approval, and we will again go out and conduct another cycle of the CAPE within the agency within 18 months. That's the department's goal. We will review cases 1 year prior to the monitoring. So previously in monitorings, there was a 6-month time frame that was looked at for sample size. We've now increased that time frame to 1 year. So we now have 1 full year of cases to review, which allowed us to increase our sample size. So not only are we reviewing a longer time frame to understand what's going on at the agencies, but we have more cases and records to include in the sample. So after the PIP or the Performance Improvement Plan is accepted by the department, that is done within the Bureau of Quality Assurance. And as the Secretary mentioned, the monitoring is done within the Bureau of Quality Assurance. The program areas are responsible for the technical assistance. So after the Performance Improvement Plan is accepted, it is then turned over to the bureaus, the Bureau of Aging Services, the Bureau of Protective Services, or the Bureau of Finance for follow-ups, any technical assistance and trainings that are needed that would be specific to that performance measure where they may have been non-compliant. Examples of technical assistance are identified issues, any questions that the AAAs may have submitted, if there's questions on policy guidance, if there's questions about policy interpretation, et cetera. The whole goal is to modify and improve their performance to increase compliance during the next monitoring cycle so that we can see a marked improvement from one cycle to the next. So if we can go to the next slide, and this is kind of a more visual or graphic representation of the CAPE review timeline. And I'd like you to look at this as cyclical. So it's not necessarily longitudinal, but this is more of a cycle that occurs where the CAPE monitoring occurs with an area agency on aging, and that can take anywhere from 2 to 3 months. We then issue a statement of findings, and if there are any performance improvement plans required, we allow the agency to implement those performance improvement plans because it's very important that through technical assistance, the Area Agency on Aging has the opportunity to implement any changes that are needed before we then select another sample size for cycle 2 of monitoring. We want to make sure that any subsequent monitorings are reviewing changes that happened that were required that we provided technical assistance on to that Area Agency on Aging. So, and while this CAPE review timeline is happening, there's many other components. CAPE is a component of monitoring that the department does. We are continuing to do ongoing technical assistance with the area agencies on aging. We are continuing to review monthly reports. We are continuing to review benchmark reports with the agency the entire time, even when a CAPE monitoring is not active. So next slide. This is really getting into the categories that we discussed earlier. So before I mentioned on a much earlier slide that there were 25 individual performance measures for protective services, and there were 36 individual performance measures for the options and caregiver support program. So we're going to focus on the protective services results. And this is really in an effort for public transparency and to identify performance of Pennsylvania's area agencies on aging. This graph will be posted to the Department of Aging's website. And as you can see, this is an example of the protective services categories. A similar graphic will also be posted for the options and caregiver support program, and we'll get to that on the next slide. The department will plan to post results of the AAA's monitorings on a very routine basis, accompanied by a narrative that explains the results. So we want to make an effort to explain what these results mean for the general public. It's really designed for readability, ease of understanding, and comprehension for the general public, which is the intended and expected users of the Department of Aging's website. And I will also say that the performance measures that we talked about before are subject to change. They could be subject to change upon review after this first cycle, but the categories will not change. So these categories will continue to be posted cycle after cycle. So just to draw your attention to the 75% mark on this chart, the red line at 75% indicates the current category threshold for minimum compliance standards. This is different than the performance measure threshold at 85%. This is the category standards for each area agency on aging. We are looking to raise these category standards by up to 5 percentage points after each monitoring cycle until we get to an 85% threshold. We can go on to the next slide. So this is the Options and Caregiver Support Program. And again, the 36 performance measures that fed into the Options and Caregiver Support Program lead into these overarching categories, which will be posted to the department's website. Again, 75% is used for a minimum category standard for each of these categories for the agency. And next slide, I'm going to get into the 75%, what that means, and how these categories are being used. It's very unique with the CAPE, sets a standard, and it really does something the department has never had the opportunity to do before. So if we can, yeah, okay, thank you. So the continued performance of area agencies on aging. As I mentioned, there was a 75% indicator on the category slides. Area agencies on aging must meet a 75% minimum category standard. Agencies monitored again at their next cycle of the CAPE need to show improvement in any categories that did not meet that minimum 75% category standard. Agencies that have not met 75% in the same category for 2 consecutive reviews will be on notice for a call to action. And what does that mean? That means a letter to the Area Agency on Aging and their board of directors, putting them on notice for action, or that means a letter to the Area Agency on Aging and their county commissioner, putting them on notice for action. Agencies not meeting 75% in the same category for 3 consecutive reviews will go to the secretary for remedial action. This process will be outlined in the cooperative agreement with the area agencies on aging. And examples of remedial action would be a term that the department, I don't believe, has used before, and that is de-designation, and we can get into that. But what I really want to highlight is the structured and streamlined process for documenting chronic AAA noncompliance and the detailed steps for addressing the noncompliance is new, and it's one of the key takeaways and successes of the CAPE. As I mentioned, it's going to be documented in the cooperative agreement, and all AAAs are required to read and sign their cooperative agreement. So they're very well aware of the standards that we're setting forth and the requirements on the agencies. But this component, these categories, really set the stage for compliance and setting a standard, an acceptable and understood standard for each agency of what they have to meet, what their goals are, and what the department has outlined for next steps should they not meet that standard. So we can go to the next slide. Additional information and next steps. Just a little bit of background on the development of the CAPE and where we're going. So we did pilot the CAPE with 5 area agencies on aging in the development. We did a lot of tool testing, and I have to give credit to my team. There were a lot of individuals at the department working on this tool. We really wanted to strive for inter-rater reliability, meaning that if one person reviewed a performance measure, the next person would get the same result, the next person would get the same result, so that when we're talking to an area agency on aging, the department itself is all on the same page. There's no questions from the department on whether or not a performance measure was met or not met. It's very objective. The secretary mentioned consensus, and we believe very strongly in having consensus before we go to an area agency on aging with a finding. So definitely kudos to my team for all their hard work that they put into this. A monitoring schedule was developed. It is posted to the department's website, so you can see the schedule in which each area agency on aging will be monitored. That is a set schedule. So we will consistently be using that schedule for monitoring area agencies on aging. We will have a set schedule. We won't skip agencies. They'll know in the order which they will be monitored. In January 2025, we did go live with the CAPE. So that was very exciting. We're off and running, and we've had a lot of success with the CAPE. Posting Area Agency on Aging CAPE results on the department's website. That is coming. We plan to post results in April. So April 2025, you can look for results of the first few agencies that have undergone a CAPE review. There is also currently a mock-up of what the categories will look like that is out on the department's website. And as I mentioned before, after each cycle of monitoring, the category thresholds may be raised up to 5% until we reach that overall 85% category threshold. So next slide. Just some key takeaways and successes of the CAPE that I'd like to highlight. So the CAPE uses objective performance measures. Again, focusing on integrator reliability, focusing on federal and state requirements, and moves away from the I thinks or I feel or it appears. It uses objective performance measures relying on subject matter experts. And that gets to the point of verification sources. Every performance measure, as I mentioned, can be pointed back to language and requirements that the AAAs have access to. The CAPE also outlines standardized and consistent accountability. We have consistent performance measures. The performance measures will not be changed for cycle 1. We have consistent thresholds for compliance. We have consistent categories. We have consistent sample sizes. The department, in order to have a standardized process, we need to make sure that everything is consistent and outlined, and the individuals that are going through the CAPE and administering the CAPE understand those processes. And then finally, the CAPE promotes transparency. So ultimately, the AAA results will be posted on the department's website. As I mentioned, there's a mock-up out there now. In April of 2025, we will begin posting the results of the first few agencies that have undergone the CAPE. So there will be public access to how the area agencies are performing with the CAPE. So I know that was a lot. That was kind of a deep dive into the CAPE.
Thank you for all that information. I'd like to mention that we have been joined by Representatives Borowski, Representative Brown, Representative Carroll, Marcel, and Lapps. Thank you for all that information, and thank you for all the tremendous amount of work that you've done to update the system so we can serve our seniors better. You know, we've heard about an increase in elder abuse cases, calls to the AAA over the years. I think it was a 60% increase, if I'm remembering my percent.
Since 2017, 82%.
82%. Okay. So with the implementation of the new CAPE program, how quickly do you believe you'll be able to get to these cases, investigate them, and how much will it improve the safety of our older adults?
Well, thank you. And CAPE is really looking at how the area agencies on aging are doing that work. And I think that you've seen on our public website that they're all in compliance. All 52 area agencies on aging are compliant with their face-to-face contact. They meet the timeframes they get out and see the older adult they make their assessments. So we've already seen a change because we see that we have all our agencies performing at that level the way they need to. All of our 7, in particular, area agencies on aging in their 20-day determination rates have improved significantly. You know, I'll highlight Westmoreland County, went from 33 and 34% to 96%. They're determining their cases in the timeframes that are outlined. And don't forget, those that aren't hitting the 20-day mark, over 50% of those cases that they're waiting to make their determination, they can't make a determination because they have not received the records for medical that they need to. And according to the law, according to the rules, they can only make a determination when they have all the information that they need. So it's not that the area agencies on aging aren't getting their cases determined in 20 days. They're not getting the information they need is another reason why we need to update OPSA. So that the Older Adult Protective Services Act helps us make sure area agencies on aging get the information that they need to make the determinations in the timeframes that are outlined by the department. Those timeframes are established by the department too. They're not in statute. They're not in law. They're the rules that the Department of Aging makes.
Thank you. And I have one more question. You talked about how if an area on aging is not performing to the standards, they'll get a letter, or they may get a letter and then the commissioner, and then they hear from the Department of Aging. Is there a remedial team? Are there people who go into that area on aging and help them to correct those measures and show them a better way forward? How does that work?
Thank you. The change in our system now is technical assistance is constant. So those area agencies on aging that aren't performing today where we sit all receive a regular monthly meeting with the Department of Aging with technical assistance. We help with them bring in training. We help them bring in supportive resources. We even help them facilitate conversations between their peers, because there are some really, there are many. In fact, 90% of our area agencies on aging are performing well. They help get those individual agencies back to where they need to be and help them improve their work. That happens every month when we pull our data, when we look at reports, when we look at the reports that are posted online, when we look at all the programs that we have. We are constantly providing technical assistance. That is the change in our practice. And you see it in the results, you see it in the improved work, you see it in the improved outcomes.
Thank you. We have questions from our members. Representative Nelson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great to hear your testimony. We were able to spend a little bit of time together during appropriations, and it dovetails nicely to the chair's question about the technical assistance team. You had brought up the team during the appropriations hearings. How many individuals are on this team? Because it sounds like more the team is assisting all counties, but if a AAA is identified in non-compliance, like what is that interaction? Does the team go on site? Is this virtual support?
We have been doing that work virtually, but we are now moving to on-site technical assistance. I believe very strongly in our team getting out into the field and having sit-down meetings at the county. That had not been the practice when I came in. We are moving to that practice. I agree that we need to be out in the fields. We need to be meeting with counties and AAAs in their territory, in the landscape that they work every day in order for us. And those teams fluctuate. There could be 2 members of our team that we assign to that. It could be a larger group. It really depends on the need and the expertise in that space.
Okay, and that expertise, is that additional training that these teams have, or they're coming from, let's say, the Department of Aging corporate, and they're heading out to the counties? What additional skill sets are they armed with, as they're going
Our
out?
team?
Yes.
Our team, now has the standard of being trained the same way because many of the people that have worked at the department never did an investigation. So we have to train them to do the work of the people that they're monitoring. So that's our first challenge at the department. So we need to bring them up to the same level as an investigator in a county office. Then we need to train them on how regulation works, okay? So that we can, they can better bring in that element of technical assistance. But when we bring those conversations back to the department, we rely on partners like Temple. The Protective Services Institute at Temple helps us identify resources for training. We bring in experts that are outside of the department in training most of the time, because there's resources beyond, just simply those that go out and monitor, those that go out and provide technical assistance on a state level. So we have a variety of tools that we use to help agencies get to where they need to be. It's not all internal. We pull on everything that we can because, again, at the end of the day, it's about how we serve the older adults the best way possible.
Sure. And one final, Madam Chair, I'm a big supporter of our AAAs, and they do an enormous amount of work. How much, in your opinion, do you feel that these non-compliance issues, because at the same time they're really limited from a funding. I mean, I think of the Penn Care line item. I think of the limited staffing, and hopefully we may adjust that. But in defense of the AAAs that are not meeting these timelines, how much of that is limited in their ability to even survive and try to maintain some of the programs connected to funding?
Well, one thing about our agencies on aging, they prioritize the work appropriately. So you can see that all of our agencies are moving forward. 7 of them have moved from, very low numbers into very high numbers of acceptable work. So even without resources, they're shifting resources away from other parts of their programs, but they're shifting resources to do.
That's my concern.
Yes.
Even without resources, that
they're performing. As I'm proud of the work that was done in Westmoreland. I have to say, because you don't go 33, 37, 96 and not get highlighted as someone who, without additional resources, reshaped their work and performed at a much higher level. It shows that the technical assistance, the way we're engaging with them, the extra support we bring in with training from all sides is helping change the work and helping prioritize the work appropriately. It's a different approach, we admit it. We're not doing the same old, but when you look at the landscape since 2017, this is the only time things have changed. This is the only time numbers have gotten better.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Madden. 18 months seems like an awful long time for the subsequent review. Could you comment on, how you came up with that?
So we can, if we do, well, it's too hard to go back to the slide. So we can talk about that in one, that we're not doing this once and done. So that 18 month is misleading because it makes us seem like we're licensing like other systems. Other systems go out and do annual licensing inspections, and they finish that inspection and then give the license to an entity. We don't have that mandate because we have a contract, our cooperative agreements with the area agencies on aging. So we're required to do continuous monitoring. So every month when we pull a report, every month when we're looking at their work and engaging with them, we are meeting the mandate of continuous monitoring the area agencies on aging. CAPE is a tool that we use to do a 12-month look back. We are using this tool to do 12 months of look back, 12 months of cases where they used to only do 6. We're looking at 12 months of cases. We're looking at that work for a year. We're asking and sitting with the area agencies on aging to do a corrective plan, which we now call a practice improvement plan. In the past, that used to be, do your corrective plan, the department approves it, we'll see you next year. That's not the case anymore. Now we're continuously checking in with them in that course of time while they're developing their plan, and then we're giving them a period of time that they have to implement the plan. Here's 3 specific months that you have that you need to implement that plan, and we have to see a change in your work for things to get better. So it's still looking at a year's worth of work, but it's also working with them to make sure their plan is real, to make sure their plan is doable and measurable, and that it's actually doing what it is set forth to accomplish. So it's, again, raising the bar of quality of work for our system, not just say this is a pass-fail, you're just doing good enough, we'll move on.
Thank you.
Representative Carroll?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary, for joining us today. And I do apologize for joining in the middle at another committee hearing. First, I want to acknowledge and say that, our AAAs, they do an amount of great work, and thank them for serving, our Asian population. I had a recent conversation as it pertains, when there's internal investigations as it pertains to elder abuse, what is the process that when maybe a complaint has timed out or dissolved and there hasn't been any maybe criminal action taken against the person who have been accused of the elder abuse? And to my understanding, sometimes the person can maybe be internally reprimanded and be fired from maybe an agency and then rehired by another agency. I want to know, what is the process as it pertains to a local, maybe a DA's office receiving information or having the opportunity to do an independent investigation?
Thank you. That highlights something that we have done since I became secretary, and that is standardize the way we communicate with law enforcement. And when I came into being secretary, we were even having difficulties communicating from our department to the Attorney General's office. So we've improved our communication. We've standardized our communication between area agencies on aging, law enforcement entities, district attorneys' offices, and we've shored up our process with the Attorney General's office. Once a case is substantiated by an area agency on aging and they move that to law enforcement, the social work aspect of the work that we do ends. And we no longer have anything but our relationship with those offices to work with. So that time frame varies. We have sent many, in many counties, like we send cases over to a district attorney's office and they don't prosecute because they don't feel they have enough evidence to go forward and prosecute, but we had enough evidence to substantiate it on our end. So there's a division in that work. As far as individuals that the individuals that work at a facility, and I think that's what you're getting at, if they're substantiated or if we know that there's a problem, they still have their background checks, and that's one of the reasons why we're looking to enhance the Older Adult Protective Services Act. That's why we need to update it. Many of the facilities that exist today didn't exist when that law came into place, and we need to get them added to the list if we want to make sure that the background checks that we're doing on those individuals is a good process to make sure that older adults are protected.
Thank you, Chairman. You brought up a really great point about there being a gap in the information that maybe a DA's office would receive, because once the investigation has been substantiated, that you guys stop at that point, and some of the information that you may have gathered will not be communicated to the DA's office. And
right, and to Representative Nelson's point, that's why we have now training on investigations and on training on gathering information on how we do interviews. It's important for our workers in the field to be able to understand how to complete a good interview, how to make sure they preserve evidence. These are things that we have changed at the department to make sure that we're educating people in the field so that they can do better and support law enforcement better. We have to support law enforcement so that prosecution can happen. We can only do that by training quality workers in the field to assist in that space.
thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Brown?
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman. And bridging off of that last question, has the CAPE system, or will it increase the requirements in any way on the Protective Services Program within the AAAs?
We are constantly hoping to improve the quality of our work. So yes, in some ways, it will make us a better network. It will make us, a better department, because we're always looking to raise the bar to do better, not just do enough.
But what specific accountability measures will you be using?
So the metrics that we outlined in the process today.
Right, but I didn't really see how those related to protective services.
Well, all of those measures, I don't know if you were here for that part of Jonathan's presentation, all of those measures are rooted in law and regulation. So every one of those categories can be traced back to the laws, regulations, and rules that we have to do protective services. So that's what's monitored and that's what's assessed. It is also the same for the options program, the caregiver program too. We're looking at their work too, making sure that they meet their requirements under our departments and under the Commonwealth's rules.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, sir, you had another question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you're aware, Representative Schmidt has introduced legislation, I think it's 372. Many of us are co-sponsors of that, which would require the department to post compliance information on the website. It's my understanding the department has provided an amendment language for the legislation that, if incorporated, would allow the department to support the bill. Am I stating that correctly?
Yes, we are working, and I have met with Representative Schmidt on this. We are supportive of this being, this being the way to do business. We believe in the transparency that he's asking for.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for meeting, and thank you for coming to that agreement. We will be running that bill next week. I just have one quick question before we adjourn. You were talking about the issues that you noted with the AAA assessments that were subjective rather than objective. And can you tell me, since you've implemented this tool, how you've seen those changes, those corrective changes, how it's made it more uniform?
Well, we just started the process in January,
right.
But what we saw in the pilot is we saw consistently areas that we needed to train on across those 5 agencies that we needed to do better as a department. That was one of the key takeaways from the pilot, was that we now have a baseline of what we need to do better to get the people in the field doing better. We didn't have that before. So we saw that early on in the pilot system, that we're able to identify systemic flaws in our system and address them quickly. So if you see a trend, you don't have to wait for 52 agencies to be done. You see a trend after the first 4, you address the problem then, and make sure that by the end of those 52 CAPE reviews, that problem no longer exists.
Thank you. And if there aren't any other questions, I would like to thank you, gentlemen, for coming and sharing this program. And we look forward to seeing how it unfolds and how it improves the cases and how we serve our older adults. Thank you so much. This meeting is adjourned.